Welcome to a close reading of Thomas Carlyle's Past and Present, Book 2, The Ancient Monk, Chapter 2, St. Edmundsbury. This reading is 4 pages long. The burgh, Bury, or Bury as they call it, of St. Edmund is still a prosperous, brisk town, beautifully diversifying with its clear brick houses, ancient clean streets, and 20 or 15,000 busy souls. The general grassy face of Suffolk, looking out right pleasantly from its hill slope towards the rising sun, and on the eastern edge of it still runs a long, black, and massive a range of monastic ruins into the wide internal spaces of which the stranger is admitted on payment of 1 shilling. Internal spaces laid out at present as a botanic garden. So this chapter is going to be about St. Edmundsbury, and we are here. So as we know, the Bury of St. Edmunds is this town here. Suffolk is referring to the ceremonial county in England that encompasses the Bury of St. Edmunds. Then Carlyle opens with burgh, bury, bury. I thought it's an interesting choice. So this is a slightly historical reference. So burgh is the, all of them mean a fortified town or a town center settlement. But the burgh is the old Germanic, Old English version. Bury is the local version. And then Bury is like the local pronunciation of it. So the Bury, St. Edmund Bury is how people in the present time of Carlyle are pronouncing it. And Carlyle is painting a picture of this space for us. And obviously the monastic ruins are those where Jocelyn of Brakeland was practicing, the monastery in which he and his abbot Samson were living at for years. So right now it's a ruin, so it's not a real monastery anymore, and it's basically become a museum. So a stranger is permitted on payment of 1 shilling. So it's like you pay and then you go and you see the ruins of this abbey. Here, stranger or townsman, sauntering at his leisure amid these vast, grim, venerable ruins, may persuade himself that an abbey of St. Edmundsbury did once exist. Nay, there's no doubt of it. See here the ancient massive gateway of architecture interesting to the eye of dilettantism, and farther on that other ancient gateway, now about to tumble unless dilettantism in these very months can subscribe money to cramp it and prop it. So Carlyle is talking about the experience of seeing the abbey in his presence in the 1850s. He's saying, a person kind of has to persuade himself that a church or a monastery, an abbey, did exist there at one point, because they're just looking at the ruins. So it's difficult to even imagine the monastery and the church that was there a long time ago. But he's saying, there's no doubt, like you have to persuade yourself, but you can persuade yourself because you see these like ancient gateways, some ruins basically that are of architectural interest to one or the other person. And then there's this other gateway, some other architectural structure that looks like it's going to fall over unless we can scrape up some money to basically restore it in his time. So Carlyle is not only painting a picture of the ruins first, but a picture of how the present people experience this ancient, or not ancient, but like centuries old ruins and structures. And we get the sense that it's basically a curiosity, like something you might do, I suppose, today on a lazy weekend. Just go and see some ruins that you barely understand. That's the way they're experiencing the ruins of the monastery in Carlyle's lifetime too. So dilettantism, by the way, is going to keep coming up. So I just wanted to redefine it. It is, I like the Merriam-Webster definition, which is a lack of skill associated with an expert or professional, amateurism. So another way of saying it is the act of behaving like a dilettante, being an amateur or a dabbler, sometimes in the arts. So we're talking about someone who has some interest in what's going on, some interest in the architecture and stuff, but they're not really fully grasping what's going on. They're not in it. They have like an amateurish perspective, which is beyond like a lack of knowledge. It's beyond. It's a lack of understanding of what these ruins really mean, what they really signify, and it's a mere curiosity, looking at them with the eyes of a mere curiosity, a novelty seeker. Here, sure enough, is an abbey, beautiful in the eye of dilettantism. Giant pedantry will also step in. I love these are like, he personifies the general attitudes of his time. So obviously, pedantry or pedantic means being overly concerned with minor details or narrowly and ostentatiously scholarly. So beyond this like amateur perspective, we also have people that are fussing over the little details. So when they examine the ruins of the abbey. So giant pedantry will also step in with its huge Dugdale and other enormous monasticons under its arm and cheerfully apprise you that this was a very great abbey, owner and indeed creator of St. Edmund's town itself, owner of wide lands and revenues, nay, that its lands were once a country of themselves, that indeed King Canute or Knut was very kind to it and gave St. Edmund's his own gold crown off his head. On one occasion, for the rest, that the monks were of such and such a genus, and such a number, and that they had so many caraquets of land. Caraquets is referring to, I don't know if I noted it down here, let's just look. I thought it's interesting. A caraquet was a medieval unit of land area approximating the land a plough team of 8 oxen could till in a single annual season. It was known by different regional names, but standardized, it sounds like, and fell under different forms of tax assessment. So it's a standard unit of land that brings in a certain amount of wealth and crops on an annual basis. So giant pedantry says, gives like these minute details about the monastery. Who founded it, how much land did it have, what was like the specific type of monks that were there, and then that they had so many caraquets of land in this 100 and so many in that, and then further that the large tower of Belfry was built by such a one, so the bell tower was built by such a one, and the smaller Belfry, the smaller bell tower, was built by somebody else, till human nature can stand no more of it, till human nature desperately take refuge in forgetfulness, almost in flat disbelief of the whole business, monks, monastery, belfries, caraquets, and all. So I love that like Carlyle is critiquing two very specific attitudes towards history and towards the ruins in his time. So one of them is like this very casual, very amateurish, very like novelty-seeking attitude towards history that basically forgets that what they're looking at has been built by people just like themselves. So it's like this extreme like curiosity, almost like you're looking at aliens. And then the other attitude is this giant pedantry, which just keeps track, it counts and quantifies all manner of things that was going on. And this, it's interesting that Carlyle is critiquing it, because this is a huge part of history, modern history, as in his time, as in ours, which is just literally quantifying, counting heads, counting lands, counting the monies, counting like who did what, to whom, for what, how many of the monks were there, what were they, like this kind of very quantified perspective to history is clearly in Carlyle's opinion, pedantic. He does not think that this is adding a lot of insight. It's creating a lot of data or preserving a lot of data, but Carlyle definitely does not seem to think it's creating insight of what history is meant to be for. I found these references interesting, and now we're going to do a divergence. Actually, I said it's like we're going to read 4 pages, but we're going to read, or at least take a look at a little bit more, because we're going to look into this reference a little bit. This is like the joy of, I think, close reading and the joy of the going into some rabbit holes on this channel. So Dugdale refers to this gentleman. He is Sir William Dugdale, who lived in the 1600s, a famous English antiquarian. His monasticon refers to Monasticon Anglicanum, a massive multi-volume scholarly work that catalogs medieval English monasteries. So giant pedantry will step in with this huge Dugdale and other enormous monasticons. What they're saying is like, as people are looking into the abbey, they're like have these reference materials by these scholars in their hands, and they're doing all these data collection and data investigation into it. And Carlyle is obviously criticizing that. But I was curious. I was, as I am, of the original text that Carlyle refers to. So we're going to take a look at this monasticon, which you easily can do because it is available online. So Monasticon Anglicanum, or the history of the ancient abbeys and other monasteries, hospitals, cathedral and collegiate churches in England and Wales. That's a work. It's been digitized, so you can see like each one of the particular monastery will have some explanation of it. And then I was going through it, and I found this. It says multi-volume, but this is only one of them. But this particular volume did have our St. Edmundsbury monastery in it. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at what's going on. I've read it. We're not going to go through it line by line. I think it's way too detailed. But we'll take a look at the general gist of what like this historical scholars of the time, the kinds of works that they were producing, reference works that they were producing about the medieval times in Carlyle's time. Okay, St. Edmundsbury in Suffolk. St. Edmundsbury, this is the first part is very interesting. The last king of East Angles, being overcome by Ingwar and Hobba pagan Danes, was cruelly bound to a tree, whipped, and then shot to death. This is like an S, so it's a little bit hard to decipher on the fly. But shot to death, suffering martyrdom for the Christian religion in the year of our Lord 870, and the 29th of his age. So there was this guy, Saint Edmund. He was a king of the East Angles. The pagan Danes came to England, and they martyred him because he was a Christian. And this happened in the year 870, when the king was 29 years old. His head and body were thrown into a thick wood by the pagans, but being afterwards found by miracle, he was buried at a neighboring place called by the Saxons Beodrigsworth, now St. Edmundsbury. So this king's body was recovered later, and it was buried in the location that we now know as St. Edmundsbury, where the Christians built a small church. But afterwards, King Canutus, so this is the when Carlyle says King Canute or Knut was very kind to it, this is one of the like things that have been documented. King Canutus, who had erected at Rome, an English school and assigned for its maintenance a sum of money which was yearly sent from England, called Romascot, by advice of his bishops and barons, changed the secular clergy, which is interesting. What is a secular clergy? I don't know. That's not a rabbit hole I'm going to go down on, but it's interesting. He changed, this king later, who had built already an English school in Rome. He changed the secular clergy belonging to this church, so this little church that the Christians had built in St. Edmundsbury, in honor of that saint that had been martyred by the pagans. So this new king, King Canitus, he changed the secular clergy at that church to monks in the year 1020. Oh, so are secular clergy the kind of religious people that are not monks? Interesting, interesting choice of words. I mean, we would never call clergy secular in the modern days, obviously. Okay, but in the year 1020, so we're now at like 150 years beyond when Saint Edmund was killed. In the year 1020, the leadership of the church changed from secular clergy to monks and brought hither from the Abbey of Holm 13 religious Benedictines whose first abbot here was one Vius. He also caused half the books, vestments, and utensils of that abbey to be removed hither. So King Canitus basically took half of the resources, including the people and other resources, like physical resources of this other abbey, this other church of Benedictine monks, and he gave them to this new abbey, the St. Edmundsbury monastery. So he basically split a church to make two or split a monastery to make two. King Edmund the Elder in the year 942 gave lands to this church, and after him the foresaid King Canitus gave many lands to this monastery and rebuilt it in a magnificent manner. So we're seeing this like church that started small in honor of Saint Edmund was the object of affection by kings thereafter that gave it a bunch of resources. Okay, I also thought this part was interesting. So controversies arising in the reign of King William the Conqueror between the abbot and the bishop of the diocese. The abbot went to Rome and found such favor with Pope Alexander II that he granted to him and his successors episcopal jurisdiction and his special privilege vis-a-vis, I suppose, that so long as they kept a porphyry altar, which he then gave to him, to the whole kingdom though the whole kingdom should fall under excommunication, yet the divine office should not cease in this abbey unless specially interdicted by name. His bull bears the date Anno Domini 1071. In the year 1081, the contest between the bishop and abbot was examined before King William the Conqueror, and upon hearing both sides, the king did declare the Church of St. Edmund and the town in which it stands to be exempt from the bishop's jurisdiction. So this is just interesting. I mean, this is all like, I think like a material dispute of basically who should be governing over a region, who should be collecting the taxes of a region, that is a little bit cloaked like a religious dispute. I mean, we saw that many kings are giving lands and resources to the monasteries. So there was this bishop who's like, the St. Edmundsbury and this abbot should report to me. So clearly wanting governance over them. And the abbot went to Rome. So it's interesting that before going to the king or before escalating it, you escalate it to Rome, which is, clearly not in England. And then with Pope Alexander II, and eventually they find it to the court of King William the Conqueror, who decided that this bishop should not have jurisdiction over over St. Edmundsbury. So I suppose this bishop in that case is probably not Catholic, or at least not the same kind of Catholic. I'm not sure. But they didn't want to be governed by them, and in the end, they were not governed by them. It's just interesting. This is like a medieval version of international law and different international bodies, duking it out in court and in other ways. So just interesting that this kind of form of conflict resolution existed, and this kind of even conflicts existed. These seem very like modern to me, the kind of conflicts there are. I mean, the people and the offices change, but the type of the conflict and where you get resources and how you defend yourself, that seems very similar to modern days. So another thing, there were some other stuff not that important to get into, but one thing that I found interesting, I think, so continuing on, like this monasticon, it lists all of the abbots of St. Edmundsbury, and the time that we are going to, so Vius, as stated, was the first abbot, initially coming from Holm, which was the Abbey of Holm, which gave half of its monks to the fledgling new St. Edmundsbury monastery. And then there were a succession of abbots until the time of Hugh, which is when our Jocelyn of Breakland starts keeping his diaries or keeping his chronicles. Hugh died, and then Samson reigned over the monastery for, this is like 30 years. So the majority of the writings of Jocelyn de Breakland are covering Abbot Samson. And then there's a whole bunch of other abbots until it seems to be dissolved around 1500. Then an interesting part of this work, the Monasticon by, what was his name, Dugdale, I found interesting the different positions in the monastery and what they get. So there were manors, lands, and revenues belonging to this abbey were divided and appropriated to the several offices of the house. Office as such and such, lands and revenues to the abbot. So the abbot, the head of the monastery, was getting some of the lands and revenues. And then these are other positions. Cellarius was getting something else, sacristan, something else, camerarius, almoner, which we know that Jocelyn of Breakland was an almoner at one point, pitanciarius, infirmarius, hostilarius. I think this might be guest master, which Jocelyn de Breakland was also a guest master for some time, and the precantor. So detailed notes on like the types of positions and how much lands and stuff were going to each, which is interesting. It's not quite what I imagined of managerial system to be. Like in the modern day, if you're in an organization, you don't get like a particular shares of the I mean, you might get shares, but like they're not that significant. Your primary compensation will be your salary and your bonuses. It won't be like a literal shares of the organization as you're keeping certain positions. So this is very much an equity split, it seems like, in terms of how the monastery is run. And so they have to be very exact in precisely how the equity split is conducted. Also, there's some obligations of the monastery. So it says the abbot was to entertain all secular guests as well as horsemen and footmen in cafe where he was resident with his family in town, but the convent was to entertain religious persons, and in cafe the abbot be absent, then the convent to entertain also secular persons if under 13 horse. So like this monastery is being built, but it has like specific duties to provide a location, a residence for different types of people. So interesting that this is like a two-way kind of street. It's not just there for them to fulfill their religious duties. This monastery is serving a specific function in the town. Then, did I find anything else interesting? Oh, this part was just humorous. So to the cellarer of this house, so this is, I think, where the food and drinks are kept. Oh, it's saying, whose office was to make provision for the diet of the whole convent, right? So this is like the house kitchen. And this is the head of the kitchen is the cellarer. did belong many rights and privileges by ancient custom. He kept the court of the lordship in town, from which he received divers annual profits. So he has so the head of the kitchen has certain titles, and certain pertaining to those titles, he receives a certain profits of what's going on. His officers were to be first served in the market in buying provisions if the abbot were not in town. Also, the cellarer and abbot's officers were to have herrings a halfpenny in the 100 cheaper than any other people. So both the head of kitchen as well as the abbot and his officers, so those who run the monastery, they get both first access to all of the foodstuffs being sold in the markets, and they get it cheaper than everybody else. So very much privileges of being running the monastery, and really interesting. These are not the types of things that obviously we imagine going on in present monasteries. So this is like a true mini government in that region. Okay. Going back to Carlyle, so Carlyle is like saying there are these ruins in, say, Edmundsbury today, and the attitude towards them are of a casual consumption as well as like very detailed record keeping, as we saw a little bit in this monasticon, to the point that like we get, which king did what, who did what kind of a monk was it, who built this thing or that thing, and we get just flooded with so many details until Carlyle says the human nature can stand no more of it, until we're just almost in flat disbelief of the whole business. Like, it's interesting how Carlyle thinks that being flooded by details, of all these like minutiae, it almost makes us believe the historical facts less. Like, we can't keep it all in our heads, it's too detailed, but in a very sort of unrealistic kind of way. Alas, what mountains of dead ashes, wreck and burnt bones, does assiduous pedantry dig up from the past time and name it history and philosophy of history, till, as we say, the human soul sinks wearied and bewildered, till the past time seems all one infinite, incredible gray void, without sun, stars, hearth fires, or candlelight, dim, offensive dust whirlwinds filling universal nature. And over your historical library, it is as if all the Titans had written for themselves, dry rubbish shot here. So Carlyle is commenting on what a poor way of reading about history, what a poor way of thinking about history this pedantism leads to. Like, all these details, they become the human soul. They literally discourage the present reader of the past, or the person who's trying to study history. It makes that person's soul wearied and bewildered. So it is like sapping energy from the soul of the person interested in history to call these minutiae history, or the study of these minutiae a philosophy of history. Like, Carlyle is saying you're degrading the profession itself, the profession of history. You're making it seem like it's just dry rubbish. It's completely useless, barely believable. It makes the entirety of human history become a gray void, something lifeless, something infinite and incredible and lifeless. And yet, these grim old walls are not a dilettantism and dubiety. They are an earnest fact. It was a most real and serious purpose that they were built for. Yes, another world it was, when these black ruins, white in their new mortar and fresh chiseling, first saw the sun as walls long ago. Gauge not with thy dilettante compasses, with that placid dilettante simper, the heavens watchtower of our fathers, the fallen of God's houses, the Golgotha of true souls departed. So here, Carlyle is imploring us to get rid of this dilettante or this pedantic perspective towards history. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Yes, I got a text from my mom. So, to this, let me remember where we were. Yes, Carlyle is like imploring the reader to do away with these like useless perspectives that reduce the interesting history to dry rubbish. And he's saying, we have to remember, we really have to cling to the fact that these ruins, they were an earnest fact. They were actually not a grey void. They were not lifeless. There was a real and serious purpose that these things were built for. And so when Carlyle says, gauge not with thy dilettante compasses, with that placid means serenely free of interruption or disturbance. So with like a kind of an monotone, amateurish, simper means smile in a silly, affected, or ingratiating manner. So he's painting a picture like, do not look at the history that we're about to read with Jocelyn of Breaklawn. Don't look at that with a kind of detached, silly, amateur perspective. These are the heaven's watchtower of our fathers. These are the churches of our fathers where they prayed. That is where they did their religious practice. The fallen God's houses. The Golgotha of true souls departed. Golgotha is the hill outside of Jerusalem where, according to the New Testament, Jesus was crucified. And obviously, in this case, Saint Edmund was killed by the Danes, and Saint Edmund's body was buried there. So this was like these ruins that for us are in danger of becoming, because of our present perspective on the past, they're in danger of becoming like these part of this gray void of the past that we don't understand. They had real people, real worship, and real sacred sites of those who were killed being honored there. This was a place of great spiritual importance to our forefathers, Carlyle is saying. By the way, Golgotha looks like this. So it's like an actual place. Their architecture, belfries and land caryatids, yes, that is but a small item of the matter. Does it ever give thee pause, this other strange item of it, that men then had a soul, not by hearsay alone, and as a figure of speech, but as a truth that they knew and practically went upon? So again, Carlyle is imploring us to see that the past does not merely consist of like architecture and bell towers and land appropriations. The people that lived there had a soul. That needs to be the focus. The focus needs to be the human soul that is producing all of these artifacts rather than the artifacts themselves. Verily, it was another world then. Their missals have become incredible, a sheer platitude, sayest thou. Missal is a liturgical book containing all the prayers, readings, and instructions needed for celebrating the Catholic Mass throughout the year. So Carlyle is saying their missals, their spiritual books, they have become incredible or a platitude to you. Clearly, like in Carlyle's time, these Catholic liturgical books, in his opinion, are not moving the souls of anyone, so they become another one of these artifacts, another one of these curiosities. So Carlyle says, you don't believe in those spiritual works? Yes, a most poor platitude, and even if thou wilt, an idolatry and blasphemy, should anyone persuade thee to believe in them, to pretend praying by them. But yet it is pity we had lost tidings of our souls. Actually, we shall have to go in quest of them again, or worse, in all ways we will befall. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Maybe in Carlyle's time, evangelizing someone of Catholicism maybe was idolatry and blasphemy. So that would imply that Protestantism is the reigning religion of Carlyle's time. I'm not totally sure why it would be blasphemous to try to persuade people to believe in the mistals, but Carlyle is clearly saying, like, whatever the case, these spiritual works have lost their purchase on our souls, but actually we'll have to find that kind of soul-stirring soul-stirring belief again, or worse, in all ways we will befall. So this is going back to Carlyle's long-term thesis throughout this book, that like the humans need to do hero worship, that we need to go towards God, we need to go towards wisdom, and this is just part of them. We will have to find something like this that orients our souls to the correct beliefs, or we will perish. A certain degree of soul, as Ben Jonson reminds us, is indispensable to keep the very body from destruction of the frightfulest sort. To save us, says he, the expense of salt. So Ben Jonson here was a major English playwright and poet, a contemporary of Shakespeare, known for his sharp wit, classical learning, and satirical drama. He wrote Volpone, The Alchemist, and other works. The line Carlyle quotes, to save us the expense of salt, that is Jonson's humorous way of saying that having some soul keeps the human body from becoming spiritually rotten, like meat that needs salt to avoid decay. So Carlyle is saying, here he's talking about, the usual Carlylism where he says we will have to believe or we will perish. And here he's basically making a reference to Ben Jonson, this other playwright. By this point, the playwright lived in the 1600s, around 1600, so about 200 years prior to Carlyle's time. And he's making a reference to another famous person, literary person basically, that agrees with him, that in order not to be rotten, so to save us the expense of salt, we really do need a certain degree of soul. So Carlyle is saying the message that he's giving, this is not like a unique and modern message. In fact, people from 200 years before Carlyle's time had been giving the same type of message to people. Ben has known men who had soul enough to keep their body and five senses from becoming carrion, which means decaying flesh of a dead animal. So Ben has known people that had enough soul to avoid this destruction and save salt. Men and also nations. So here we see another Carlylism where he always zooms in from the unit to the mass, from a man, one man, to that of a nation. You may look in Manchester hunger mobs and corn law commons houses and various other quarters and say whether either soul or else salt is not somewhat wanted at present. So Carlyle is definitely seeing a spiritual rot in England with all these manifestations of it, the hunger mobs, the corn laws. And he's saying, like, you either need to get the soul back or you need to get the salt, which means the flesh is decaying and it needs salt to be preserved. So he's saying we are at that juncture where we have to decide as a nation between going the salt route or the soul route. Another world truly, and this present poor, distressed world might get some profit by looking wisely into it instead of foolishly. Interesting, by looking wisely into it instead of foolishly. So what are these foolish ways of looking? As Carlyle had mentioned, it is this cartoonish, amateurish way of looking, or this pedantic, counting, quantifying way of looking. Those are foolish. But we could get something from Jocelyn's time, from the medieval monks' time, if we are to look wisely into it. But at lowest, O dilettante friend, so, Carlyle is, by referring to the "O dilettante friend" and occasionally referring to you, the reader, clearly Carlyle is doing his best across this chapter to counteract a prevailing notion of the time. Like this dilettantism, that is not a marginal perspective on history. That seems to be the pervasive perspective on history, and Carlyle is writing paragraph and paragraph. In fact, we're 2 chapters in, we haven't gotten to anything that Jocelyn has written yet, because Carlyle, before he even introduces anything that the monk has said and what that might mean about medieval England, he's trying to make sure the reader that is joining Carlyle on this journey has the correct perspective on history so that they can be receptive to those messages. But at lowest, O dilettante friend, let us now always that it was a world. Let us know always that it was a world, and not a void infinite of gray haze with phantasms swimming in it. Carlyle is emphasizing we're not reading fiction. This was a world, it was real. These old St. Edmundsbury walls, I say, were not peopled with phantasms, but with men of flesh and blood, made all together as we are. We are looking, when we read about St. Edmundsbury's history from Jocelyn, we are looking at real people who lived. We're not looking at imaginary people. This is not fiction, not science fiction, nothing like that. These people are made of the same things that we are. They are as people as we are, and they are behaving. Carlyle is saying there's like a logic to their operation that we should be able to identify with because we're made of the same stuff as them. Had thou and I then been, who knows, but we ourselves had taken refuge from an evil time and fled to dwell there and meditate on that eternity in such fashion as we could. Alas, how like an osseous fragment, a broken, blackened shinbone of the old dead ages, this black ruin being that of the monastery, looks out, not yet covered by the soil, still indicating what a once gigantic life lies buried there. So Carlyle is saying this monastery, the ruins of the monastery, they're likened to this fossil, except one that has not been buried yet. So it's just as alien, just as gone, compared looking from his time, but it's still on the surface. So we can see the details a little bit better because they're still present, they still look out towards us. And Carlyle is saying the goal or the perspective that we must there is that you and I, so the reader and Carlyle, go to that time. They dwell there. They almost like live and meditate in the same environment as the medieval monks. The goal of history, so very much like Carlyle says, it is not a curiosity. It's not entertainment. The point of reading history, it's not entertainment. It's not novelty. It's also not these like quantifications and counting. It is actually to walk among the time of whatever history is being described and understand it to the point that you could almost be dropped there and live in it. Understand it so well. Understand the human spiritual experience of living there to that degree. It is dead now and dumb, but was alive once and spake. For 20 generations here was the earthly arena where painful living men worked out their life wrestle, looked at by earth, by heaven and hell. Bells tolled to prayers, and men of many humors, various thoughts, chanted vespers, matins, and round little islet of their life rolled forever, as round ours still rolls, though we're blind and deaf, the illimitable ocean, tinting all things with its eternal hues and reflexes, making strange prophetic music. How silent now, all departed and gone. Vespers are the 6th of the canonical hours that is said or sung in late afternoon or early evening. So these are early evening prayers, basically. and matins are the night office forming with lauds the first of the canonical hours, in other words, morning prayers. So around these hills, they were real men of many humors, various thoughts, and they chanted all these different prayers throughout the day. And around their little islet of life was the ocean, as it is with ours. Although, just like them, probably we don't reflect on the ocean, the presence of the ocean, very much. But it is an ever-present reality, both in their time and in ours. And Carlyle is saying all this hustling and bustling life of these monks, that is all silent now, all departed, clean gone. The world dramaturgist, which is just a beautiful way of saying God, the dramaturgist of the world, God, has written exeunt, which means a stage direction to specify that all or certain named characters should leave the stage. So God has said that this type of life, the life of the monks in this Benedictine monastery in the medieval times, that has left the stage completely. It's gone. He's saying in many different ways, he's comparing it to the fossils and the gray haze of the past. Carlyle is truly emphasizing in various images that this type of life is not present at all in his time in the mid-1800s. The devouring time demons have made away with it all, and in its stead there's either nothing or, what is worse, offensive universal dust clouds and gray eclipse of earth and heaven from dry rubbish shot here. I love the sentence. I really love the sentence because it's saying it's not only that this world is gone, that the time demons have made away with it and there's nothing. Carlyle is saying what is worse. It's actually possible for something to be worse than no references to history, which is this gray eclipse, this universal dust cloud, this dry rubbish shot here, which was basically over your historical library. If you, like all these minutiae, you can basically have a lot of history preserved, counted, written about, like the monasticon that we read about, and yet it's possible that to be worse than nothing, because what it offers is it takes the history and it preserves none of the spirit, but preserves a lot of the kind of quantified stuff. It preserves a lot of lineages, like it was this abbot and then that abbot and this king gave that crown. So it's possible to have history that is entirely devoid of life. And an understanding of history and its preservation as dry rubbish, as completely lifeless, Carlyle thinks that is worse than nothing. This is quite the judgment and a very interesting perspective. Truly, it is no easy matter to get across the chasm of 7 centuries filled with such material. But here of all helps is not a Boswell the welcomest, even a small Boswell. Veracity, true simplicity of heart, how valuable are these always. He that speaks what is really in him will find men to listen, though under never such impediments. Though under never such impediments, that means even if he faces the greatest possible obstacles. So, I loved this sentence as well. It's one worth meditating on. Carlyle says, he that speaks what is really in him will find men to listen, though despite many obstacles. So Carlyle is saying a true and sincere expression of the internal realities of a person will always find an audience. Very, very interesting. Even gossip, springing free and cheery from a human heart, This too is a kind of veracity in speech, much preferable to pedantry and inane grey haze. So, contrasting it to pedantry and grey haze, Carlyle seems to say it's actually the history books, the kinds of works like Monasticon that will be forgotten sooner and faster than a work like Jocelyn the monk, who wrote about his experiences truthfully with a veracity as a monk. Like the first person human experience, Carlyle is clearly saying that will be of eternal, timeless interest to people. But this kind of minutia will not be valued in the long run. Jocelyn is weak and garrulous. Garrulous means given to prosy rambling. So Jocelyn's clearly a rambler, and he's weak, but he's human. Instead of like fake. Jocelyn is weak and garrulous, but he is human. Through the thin, watery gossip of our Jocelyn, we do get some glimpses of that deep buried time, discerned veritably, though in a fitful, intermittent manner, discerned truthfully, but in a sparse, intermittent manner, these antique figures and their life method face to face. Beautifully, in our earnest, loving glance, the old centuries melt from opaque to partially translucent. How beautiful of an image. The centuries melt from opaque to partially translucent. Transparent here and there, and the void of black night one finds is but the summing up of innumerable peopled luminous days. What an image. So the void black night that we thought was the past, especially the medieval past, the long forgotten past that is no longer present. It's fossilized, it is extinct. The world dramaturgist has shifted it off the stage. This void black night, as we read Jocelyn, as we understand and get into it, and as we go through that time and imagine ourselves there, imagine and look deeply on the people there, that void black night of the past, we find is just a sum of innumerable days, luminous days. It's not black days, the days are lit, the day we can see and perceive the days, peopled. So as we understand each day that is luminous and that has peoples and people interactions and the vicissitudes of life going on every day, as you add them up, that just is what appears to us like a void black night. But if we zoom in, we can see and perceive the luminous days. Not parchment chartularies, doctrines of the Constitution, oh dry as dust, not altogether my erudite friend. So, dry as dust is a mocking nickname used by Carlyle and earlier writers like Sir Walter Scott, referring to a dull, pedantic antiquarian and historian, like probably the person that wrote the Monasticon. Who was he again? William Dugdale. So, dry as dust. The people that have these perspectives, like dry as dust, he's clearly saying what the interesting thing about the past are not the parchments, chartularies. So these are medieval record book, which a monastery, church, or other institution copied and preserved. In which they copied and preserved its important documents, especially charters, land grants, legal rights, and privileges. So, as we read history, the point is not to read these records, doctrines of the Constitution, these like abstract ideals. That's not the goal and the point at all. The point is to see. The point of looking into history is to decipher the void black night into innumerable peopled luminous days. and to perceive some of those days. Readers who please to go along with us into this poor Joscelinian chronica shall wander, inconveniently enough, as in wintry twilight through some poor stripped hazel grove, rustling with foolish noises and perpetually hindering the eyesight, but across which here and there some real human figure is seen moving, very strange, whom we could hail if he would answer, and we look into a pair of eyes deep as our own, imaging our own, but all unconscious of us, to whom we, for the time, are become as spirits invisible. So Carlyle is saying that you and me, the reader and I, we will read these Jocelyn's chronicles, and the feeling of reading them, it will be something like walking through a poor stripped hazel grove. So that means a grove of hazel trees that has been stripped bare, its branches cut, leaves gone. But it's poor stripped, so it's not quite bare and revealing itself to us. So there'll be a lot of things hindering the eyesight. Like we're taking a walk in this garden or in this hazel grove, we're not able to see everything. We're able to see things partially, and occasionally we see a real human figure in this hazel grove, and we could almost have a chat with them. We are that much present in their world, but of course the people we see, they cannot answer. We only resurrect these people from centuries-old documents. So we should be able to see exactly who they are, how they work. We should be able to see into their eyes and see a pair of eyes deep as our own. So we should not caricature these people. We should really be able to look at them and understand them. But of course, they won't be able to hear us, and they'll be unconscious of us. In some ways, we'll be walking in their world as spirits. Just like if you imagine in our modern world, as you're going about your day, there might be spirits around you and you're completely unaware of them, but they can perceive you, they can see the complexity with which you are operating. Like those spirits will the reader and Thomas Carlyle be gazing at Jocelyn and the monastery. Thank you very much for joining me in this close reading of Thomas Carlyle's Past and Present, Book 2, The Ancient Monk, Chapter 2, St. Edmundsbury.